So you want to learn how to turn this into this? Let me take you step by step through the process of me building realistic foliage in the capybara and tapir habitat, and let me teach you what exactly to keep in mind, what to consider, and how to execute this work. And watch me as I build this in real time. So let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome back, and it's been a while since I've done a proper tutorial, but now's the day, and today I will show you how I make realistic foliage, and I'm going to show you this while building the habitat for the tapir and the capybara. I've already started building the basic layout with the background and the fencing. But now we are only going to focus on the foliage, and in the next episode, where I'm going to show the speed build of the whole habitat, you will be able to see how I build everything else around here. And I'm basically going to take you step by step through the process on how I make foliage and landscape within a habitat. So let's get started. And the very first part that I normally do is I start with a pretty much blank canvas, and to not be like too scared to start and not knowing where to start exactly, I normally start with like focal points. I start with big trees, with special items, for example a climbing frame, or with a special cave that I want to build, so like bigger things that I want to put in this habitat, so that I can start working around that and not be like bombarded with just a whole blank canvas. So for the tapir and the capybara, I am not going to make any like caves or climbing frames, so I'm just going to start with the bigger trees that I want to use. And I already thought about using the birch trees, so I'm gonna search up my birch trees. I've seen this one inspirational picture from Pinterest that I really enjoyed, and I'm trying to kind of recreate the look of it. I'm not like copying the whole habitat, but I'm just trying to copy the style. It's also really important to have something to look at while you're building something, so that you're not overwhelmed and don't know where to start or how you want it to look. And just taking a picture and using that can help you so much. So definitely look up pictures and try to recreate at the beginning if you don't know where exactly to start, and then you can start doing your own things that come up in your mind. So I have my inspirational picture on my second desktop, and I'm gonna start with the birch trees. While I was talking, I was thinking about using a different tree actually that I really like. I'm not quite sure how it's called. Let me look this up real quick. Okay, so I also really enjoy this tree, to be specific, and maybe I'm gonna also use this. Also, don't be afraid to start over with your things. Really think through what you're using and maybe start over. Don't be too scared, just start over. I know it just takes time, but sometimes things can be better. But now that I'm also looking at this tree, I'm also thinking about dumping my idea with the birch trees and just using these ones. I think I'm gonna go with this one. I don't want to have like a huge amount of big trees in here, so I'm just gonna honestly start placing them randomly. So maybe I want to have something more in this corner, so when you're walking around here that you're not directly looking into the whole habitat, but still kind of blocking the view a little bit. I'm gonna use the smaller one. You can also try to stack trees to give them a different look, to make them more lush. I think I'm gonna actually do this with this one. So I'm gonna place the small tree into the bigger tree, and you can't even tell. That's also something how you can change the look of certain things. I also don't like the way that the tree is sticking out, so I'm just gonna place it a little bit lower here. And I think for now that's gonna be it. I don't want it to have too many trees in here, so it's not blocking the view from the animals too much. So that's basically it for now. And now I have these like bigger things in my habitat, my focal points, and now I can start building around them. So the second step that I normally do is laying out a floor plan for the animals, where I think that they would normally walk in. So I'm just gonna use a different color. I'm gonna use the light soil because everything is painted in the heavy soil, so I'm gonna use the light one. And I'm just gonna start like drawing where I think that the animal is going to walk. So over here, this is going to be the entrance into the indoor habitat. So of course they will walk here. So I'm just gonna paint this in the lighter soil. And I think I'm gonna just do like around the tree. And then of course to the water. Tapirs and capybaras love to be in water, so we already have that. And we're just gonna draw a straight line to here. And sometimes animals like to go the shorter way, so I'm also gonna draw a path right here. And then of course around this tree, I think I also like to use placing plants in groups. So I'm gonna be grouping things around the trees. And then we will maybe do like a walk in front of here. And then something more towards the back. And maybe I'm gonna do maybe something more towards the front too. Maybe something like this. I'm gonna draw a little bit more dark soil here so I can see it a little better, this little gap. And also don't make them too big. Those animals are not huge, so you can just choose a small diameter of the painting brush. And I think that's gonna be it for now, honestly. The habitat is not ginormous, so I think that's looking good. So now that I have my floor plan, I'm gonna start with a little bit of rocks. And for this habitat, I am thinking about using temperate rock or more like the tropical rock, so it fits the mud walls that I have in the back. I think for the capybaras and the tapir, because this whole habitat is also supposed to look a little bit more muddy, that's why I also use these mud walls. I think they are from Pacha. He did these and uploaded them on the Steam Workshop, so I will definitely link the mud walls down in the description so you can also use them. And I think I'm gonna use the tropical rocks. So let's just search up the tropical ones and use the darker ones. I am not going to make like a huge rock work tutorial here. It's just to show you a little bit more of the foliage and plant work, and rocks always go with it, but this is not supposed to tell you how exactly to use rocks. So I think I'm gonna use this one and lower it down because it's like really steep. Then I'm gonna use something more flat. I was using or thinking about using this one. Maybe where's the pretty side? Over here. Then maybe something like this. I'm not gonna go crazy with the rocks in here, but it's good to have like a little bit. And maybe we can do something over here to have more of a little gap. I think I'm gonna use the bigger ones. So you can always look at the rocks. They oftentimes have like one side that's a little bit more interesting and not too flat, with more of some cracks. And I'm gonna make this so there's a little gap underneath. I'm also gonna use the different one, maybe different side. I think this is pretty good already. I'm gonna try to align it with the other one. So now over here we have like a little gap underneath, nothing too crazy. And I'm also gonna use the little like rock pile that I did. I already have a little short on my YouTube where you can see like just a really quick tutorial on how to make these little rock piles. It's pretty easy, so definitely check this one out. And now I'm gonna start placing more rocks. I feel like I can use something here in the front. And these rock piles really can help you to just fill in the space a little bit. It's nothing too crazy. As you can see, it's just some smaller rocks, a few pebbles, and a little bit of grass already, although you can totally leave out the grass if you don't want to. But this just helps to create a little bit in your habitat without going into detail, and just having a little something to fill in the space. Gonna use more around here. And I also really like to group my rocks, since the rocks are oftentimes not as easy to pass for the animals. Always keep that in mind, that it's supposed to still be functional so that the animals can move around. And I think I'm gonna do a little bit more in this corner over here. Also, don't forget to twist and turn these. Maybe we can stack that. And alongside walls, you can often also use these. The stalagmites and stalactites, where this mud wall is made of, often have a bigger area where animals cannot traverse, so you can kind of use that to your advantage and fill in this non-traversable area with things that the animal cannot traverse, so you are not losing like any space, if this makes any sense that I'm saying right now. And I think a little bit behind here, although you can't really see that. And then I'm gonna use a little bit here. And this just helps to have a little idea, and it's already looking much better than before, and this went like super quick. And what I often see with beginners in Planet Zoo is that they don't use enough items. So definitely go overboard with your pieces that you use, because oftentimes you're still not using enough. If you're thinking this is enough, or if you're asking yourself, is this enough that I'm doing right now? It's probably not. Just keep on stacking things till you're satisfied, and do more than you think that you need. This really helps you a lot. And now I'm gonna use the little like pebble piles from Caesar's like blueprint. I'm not exactly sure how it's called, but I'm gonna link all the blueprints that I'm using down in the description. I don't often use blueprints of different creators or other creators than myself, because I just love to do everything on my own, but some things are just too good to not use them. For example, the mud walls, they are like really intricate details and many pieces, and I'm just honestly a little bit too lazy to recreate them. Same with the like little pebble piles, and also cedars, like stalagmite and stalactite backdrop pieces that he uses all the time, and basically everyone in Planet Zoo, because they are just too good to not use them. So I'm also using these, although I sometimes try to make my own backdrops if I can. So this is gonna be a little bit of tedious work finding places where to place more of these. So I'm gonna speed up me using these pieces just a little bit to save some time. So what I did is not only place the pebbles in areas where it's painted in the dark soil or heavy soil, where the animals is not going to traverse, but I'm also placing them in the pathways. So the pathways are supposed to be relatively open for the animals so that they can easily traverse and to show where the animals would naturally walk over, but to not make them look too empty, I'm still gonna place a few pebbles, a little bit of grass and different plants, and you can also use decals just to make these areas still look a little bit too interesting, because there's honestly nothing worse than keeping the space open and just using the painting tool. This always makes your habitats look like almost cheap and like not really interesting. So try to keep the whole place interesting, also the areas that are supposed to be open. So what I do next is my little buffalo grass technique that you can see me do all the time. So we're gonna search up our buffalo grass, and I'm thinking about using the dry or the natural one, although I feel like the dry one doesn't really look dry and more like swampy, I would say. So I think I'm gonna go with the mixture of them. So what I'm doing with the buffalo grass is I just take the bigger pieces, I put them into the areas where I painted the heavy soil, so the areas that the animal is probably not going to traverse. Now I'm gonna place a few of the buffalo pieces, buffalo grasses, group them together. I'm gonna go into the group, so you can see I'm editing the group right now. I'm gonna again use these ones and I'm gonna place them around the whole habitat. You can use the align to surface tool, but sometimes, especially around pebbles, it doesn't really work that well. So I'm gonna place this in areas where it's painted in the heavy soil. I'm gonna do that all around the whole habitat. Always be cautious to not accidentally put them into a different group, because then everything is not going to work. So be careful around the pebbles to not accidentally put them into the same group as the pebbles. What can help if you can't manage to not select the group is turn off the align to surface and lower it a little bit, and then it's not going to bother you and telling you to put it into this group. And aligning it to the surface can help, especially in like sloped areas, so it doesn't look weird and you have like weird things sticking out. So I'm gonna do that all in the areas. Am I still in the group? Yes. This can take a little bit of time. If you see here, like this looks a little bit weird, so I'm gonna use the smaller pieces in like really slopey areas, so it's still gonna fit. This was like a little bit wonky. Also with the glass, be a little bit cautious to not put this into the glass so it's not clipping through. And if you feel like you have all the areas that are painted in the dark soil or whatever color you used or terrain. You will then leave the group, or not leave the group, yes, you're gonna leave the group. Or I feel like I missed a few spots, so I'm gonna go back in. Oops. And over here it's not really working with the... Does it? Yes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm leaving the group. I have the whole group selected, as you can see, and now I'm gonna press X so that I have this tool, and I'm gonna lower it a little bit into the ground, just a tiny bit. And that's our first layer of the grass. And I think I'm gonna use also a little bit of the like normal buffalo grass. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna place it just like that, just to have a little bit more of this color over here. I'm not putting them into a group right now because I don't want to have too many of these in here. So I'm just gonna place them like that. I'm always lowering the buffalo grass a little bit into the ground. This just makes it look a little bit more realistic. I don't know what exactly it is, but it just does. So we're gonna do this all around where we place the drier grass. And now you will have a nice mixture of the different grasses, because natural grass is not always looking like picture perfect. This is not a garden where people are like working to have a like picture perfect. This is a zoo habitat where wild animals are walking around. So always keep that in mind. It's not going to be super perfect. There's animals walking over them, stomping the plants, probably also eating the plants. So keep that in mind. So I feel like that's enough. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take the smaller pieces. I'm gonna turn on the align to surface, and I'm gonna do this again. I'm gonna put them into a group. I'm gonna go into the group and select them again. And now I'm going to place them around these little like grass islands that we have. So I'm going all around. We are also going to be like on the pathways that we did before, or like that we painted for the animals. It's absolutely perfect. Don't cover them like completely so you can't really see them, but it's totally fine if you're going into these pathways with your buffalo grass. Because as I said before, we don't want them to look like super clean. Again, this is a zoo habitat and not a garden. So I'm gonna do that all around the little islands. Just like that. And a little bit more here. And now I'm gonna leave the group. And then I'm gonna again press X. Now I'm gonna lower it even more. You can just select a certain area where you can see it a little bit closer. And then I'm gonna lower it a bit more than we did with the first group. So it's just the tips, as you can see here. And here you can see much more grass. And here we just have the tips of the grasses. So what this does is you have these bigger areas where the animals are not going to traverse. So this grass can grow much better. The animals are not stomping or eating those grasses as much as the grasses that are closer to the pathways that they can actually access. So what this does is it's harder for the grass to grow. They're eating it, so there's less grass than in areas that they are not easily accessible. So that's basically what I do with my little buffalo grass technique. as you can see, is already looking like pretty lush, even though we just have rocks, 2 trees and some grasses. I often do like 2 layers depending on how happy I am with the look, what look I'm going for and how big the whole habitat is. I sometimes do this like 3 times, and then with the 3rd time it's basically like super low in the ground, so it's just the tips looking out of the ground. It's just barely visible. But I feel like with this one I'm gonna just keep it like this for now. This doesn't mean that we cannot use buffalo grass any further, but for now this gives me like a pretty decent base to work with. While building, I normally don't put in the animals into the habitat, but to still have like an idea of how big or how small the habitat should be, what I like to do is I place my animals in a different like little pan, as you can see over here. And what I do with this is I basically test the traversable areas. This is important to see how small of gaps you can do. For example, the little walkthroughs into the inside area or into the backstage area, and also this helps you to determine how small you can do these little like pathways that we painted. So if you have an animal that needs a lot of area to walk through, then you can't be placing like big rocks like super close together. And I also use this to test if they can walk over the pebbles. And what I also do is I test how big the animal is. And since I do not place the animal inside the habitat, you can totally do so, but I just don't like using the barriers before I know where exactly the barriers are going to be. So I use these little statues and I try to figure out what statue is like the size of the animal, around the size of the animal. And I figured for the tapir and the capybara that these ones are pretty much the size. So we have, where's the tapir? So you can see like the takin statue is around the size of the tapir, and the little pangolin statue is around the size of the capybara. This one's sleeping right now, so it's laying on the floor, but this is around the size. The capybara is a little bit smaller than the pangolin statue, but this is like, it gives you a rough idea on how big this animal is. And what I do is I take these, I normally do this when laying out the plan for the habitat, so that you can see how big is the habitat actually, because I sometimes find it a little bit hard to determine, is this too big, too small, if you don't have like a reference to the animal. So here you can see that the animals can perfectly walk through those pathways. It's like it has like a pretty decent size compared to the animals, but since we are going to place multiple of them in here, we still want the animals to be happy and healthy in here. So this seems like a pretty decent size, and you can always use this to determine, is my fence high enough, something like that, without having the need of placing the animal inside. So you can see the animals would not be able to like jump over the fence. So that's what I always love to do, as like a little extra tip for you. So now that we have the buffalo grass, I wanted to have like a really lush and almost like a little more muddy habitat. So what I'm gonna do now first, before we even go back to the plants, I'm gonna place in some like logs and branches. And for that, I really like to use them from the Habitat tab, enrichment items, and then the climbables. I feel like these just have a pretty nice look to them, so I really like using these. I think I'm gonna put just one bigger like tree stump in here. I'm gonna lower it a little bit into the ground, wedge them in between the rocks. I'm gonna narrow it a little bit, even like that. Also using like branches and stuff like that just adds a little bit more character, a little bit more interesting things to look at. Also try to use as many different things as you can. As I said in the beginning, if you are asking yourself, is this enough? It's probably not, and do more since you're satisfied. So I'm gonna place a few of them like randomly. Also, I'm gonna place them in areas that the animals is not going to traverse, since they have like a little bit of an area where the animal cannot pass them. And I think I'm gonna quickly make like a little like branch of my own. I'm gonna do something like this, and also stacking things like this can really help you to make your habitats just look much better. I think I'm gonna use this one like 3 times over one another, and I'm gonna turn this like that. Oops, wrong group, and group them together, and I'm gonna copy it and gonna place some more around here. Maybe one over here. And what you can also do is in the nature tab you can search for broken, and then you get all these like broken down trees and tree stumps. And what I also like to use is this. It's called the broken yellow IP tree. I think I pronounced that right. And if you lower it into the ground and place it like this, you can have like multiple rocks, not rocks, but branches sticking out of the ground. Like in this area it's looking a little bit weird because it's clipping into the back wall, so I'm gonna place it a little bit more like this. I think I'm gonna use that a little bit more maybe in this corner. This has like a pretty bad traversable area, this item, at least for the animals that I was looking at when I tested that. So keep that in mind when using this. And it looks nice, but be prepared that the animals are not going to traverse super nicely through here. Oops. I'm gonna turn that a little bit. And also keep in mind to not have it like through this rock. This does not look realistic, so try to keep that in mind, that things are not clipping in a weird way that doesn't make sense. I'm gonna put this right here. Since these animals are not going to climb like such small birch trees, or not birch trees, but branches, I'm not too scared about placing it too close to the fence. Also keep these things in mind with animals that can climb. Don't place trees and logs and branches too close to the fencing so that they could jump or climb out of your habitat. You don't want that. So also keep that in mind. I think I'm gonna use just maybe one bigger tree. Let me see, maybe one of the birch ones over here in the corner. And now we have a little bit more of something to look at, and I also like to use these things. Just gonna place one over here, and maybe we can also use like one of these and put this somewhere here. So that's basically it. And now I'm gonna start actually working with the foliage. So another tip is to have like foliage pieces that you really enjoy and also put them into your favorites. I always go back to these plants with basically all of my habitats. I of course don't use all of them all the time, but I just like to use them. They're really like versatile. You can use them with a lot of different like biomes and looks. And I also completely forgot to use a leaf litter. That's also something that you definitely need to take in mind, that if you have trees in a habitat, the tree is going to shed leaves. So I always love to use the leaves around. I also completely forgot to put on random rotation. I mean, with the grasses you can't really tell, but later with the different plants. So put on random rotation. I'm also gonna place it closer to the edge that we have, to the fencing, because those are also areas where like leaf litter and stuff like that would accumulate just by be blown by the wind, taken over there by the animals or stuff like that. So I'm also gonna place a few over here, and then maybe here. It can also be a little bit tricky sometimes with the slopey areas. And then around this tree. Something like that. And then maybe over here in the back, we're also gonna use some of the leaf litter. So maybe something more here, and then we are finished. And then I'm gonna start with the bushes. I basically jump from the biggest things like the trees to the smallest, what are the grasses, and then I start with the next biggest thing, that would be the bushes, and then I'm gonna walk down towards the smallest of pieces. I hope that made sense. So what bushes I like to use are the creosote bush. I have no idea how to properly pronounce that, so I am very sorry. And I'm gonna place that in here around the trees and also close to the rocks. You can also lower it into the ground like a lot, to just have like a little bit sticking out, also into areas like behind this like little fallen log. Animals wouldn't be able to get too close to the plants behind that, so it can be a little bit more lush. And then also around the corners I'm gonna use them. And what I do is I take one plant, place it all around the habitat, and then I'm gonna go to the next plant, place that all around the habitat, and so on and so forth. This is something that works for me. It doesn't necessarily need to work for you. Maybe you like to focus on one little corner of the habitat, build that completely with all the different kind of plants that you want to use, and then move to the next corner and build that. So you can try both like techniques. It really depends what you personally like the most, and then you can do that. So as I said, I just like to use one plant all over the habitat. I just go around the whole thing and place it in all the areas that I want. With like a bit more smaller habitats like this one, it can be relatively easy, but it can be a bit overwhelming with like really big habitats, for example for elephants, because those habitats are really ginormous, and just going through the whole habitat can be a lot. So maybe there you would need to focus on certain areas and build them and go back to the next area. And also what I like to use with the bushes, I always use the dry version when I have herbivores in this habitat, since they will probably eat some of the bushes. And I'm gonna place them in here, and what this does, it makes it look like some of the branches are like eaten up or dried, and this just makes it look so much more realistic than before. For example, over here, just placing a little bit of that in here, and it just looks so much better. It also creates like really dainty like details, and what we love in Planet Zoo are really small and dainty items. So in areas where they would not get up to, like here, I probably wouldn't place too many of the dry bushes, just a little bit. And in areas where they can access, I use this a lot more. For example, around here. And that's what I like to do with the bushes. And this already looks so much better now. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm gonna use a different type of bush. I think I'm gonna use this bramble bush. Or do we have something else? Or maybe I'm gonna use this one. I also tried to vary a little bit with my selection of plants, but I feel like this can look really nice in here. So I'm just gonna use this one and place it also in areas like around the trees, around the corners, and around like the rocks and fallen trees that we have. And what I do is basically layer different plants all over till I'm satisfied, and sometimes I just go back to the same plant that I already used and use it again if I feel like I need more of that, especially like bigger plants like the bushes. If you're asking yourself what type of plant should I use, you can definitely check the Zoopedia of the animal, what area they live in and what biome they live in, and then select these into the filter of the plants, and that can give you an idea on what plants to use. Also, what I do is, for example, this is a more of a tropical habitat, but this zoo is located in a temperate biome. So I wouldn't necessarily use all of the tropical plants because they sometimes need certain temperatures to thrive, and in a temperate biome we have really cold months. So some tropical plants just wouldn't thrive in the winter. So I'm often also using just temperate plants in the habitat because we are located in a temperate biome. Things like ferns also look like pretty much tropical, but ferns also thrive in temperate biomes. So you can use them and still have a little bit of tropical. This doesn't mean that you cannot use tropical plants at all in your builds, but just keep in mind that some, like for example orchids, they would just not fit into a habitat like this. So keep that in mind if you want to build realistically. Also, plants that would, for example, grow in the desert wouldn't thrive in a taiga biome. So keep this in mind while building. So now that I placed like my bushes all around, I'm gonna move over to smaller plants, and I'm thinking what I should start to use. Also, the nettle is a plant that basically grows everywhere, at least in like temperate biomes. I feel like they grow in every little corner. So I really like to use this. I think it's a base game item. Yes, it's a base game item. And I feel like even though it's a base game plant, it still looks really good. Some plants just look really like plasticky. So I don't use these. Always go for the look of the plant. don't just think because it fits the biome that you need to use it. Look at the model, and if you think it looks good, it looks realistic, then go ahead and use it. If you think it looks a little bit off, it looks a little bit weird, or maybe too big. For example, with some trees, some of the tropical trees are just absolutely ginormous and they would absolutely not fit in a temperate biome. If you would use them in like a rainforest zoo that's located in a rainforest, you can absolutely use them, but here I feel like they just would not look great, so I'm not gonna use them. And I feel like in like little nooks and crannies like this, the nettle would just absolutely thrive. I also vary with the sizes of the nettle. I use the bigger ones, I use the medium one. I feel like the small one, you can use that if you're really going into detail in some areas. And as you can tell, I'm not using the align to surface. I'm always changing the height. I'm going lower into the ground, I'm going higher. Sometimes also in corners like this, you can place them even higher. You would see this would normally probably like not connect. No, this is a bad example, but like here, this is like the ground level around like this, but you can totally lift it up. So don't be afraid to use that, because example like nettle, it can grow much higher than it's in the model itself. So I'm gonna use that all around, and I'm pretty satisfied with that. So I think next I'm gonna use the cabbage tree, and with this one I'm always using the small one, but now I'm thinking about actually using the bigger tree. And also try to be creative. Don't just use bushes to create bushes. You can also use trees to create bushes, and by lowering them into the ground you can create this nice looking bush. And I actually like this placement over here. I think I'm gonna put this in here, because right now it's still feeling quite open, so I feel like we can definitely use some bigger bushes. Gonna do this, gonna place one over here. Oops. And over here, and maybe one here. Use this on here, and I feel like over, I'm gonna just use this one. You can also create this as like little bushes, or like a different sort of grass if you are putting it really low into the ground. Absolutely amazing plant model. I use this all the time, but it does have a little bit of a weird traversable area, so keep that in mind. You, as I said, have like your little test pen where you can test out different things, and over time you will learn what you can use and what not when it comes to the traversable area, especially if you're doing really small habitats. It can be super crucial to know your traversable area of your plants. For example, when the Quick came out with the Zookeeper's Animal Pack, I was actually not testing the traversable area, and I built this really beautiful habitat for them. I put them in and they could not move around. Absolutely devastating. I hated it. They did fix the traversable area of the Quick, but at that moment it was like really, I was not happy to say. And this can be really devastating if you're building a beautiful habitat and then you completely need to redo it because the animal cannot move. I am building in sandbox mode, so I am building for the looks and not the like usability or practicability or something like that. So I don't mind if they don't use the whole habitat, but I still want them to move normally around the habitat and not have like a really wonky habitat where they cannot move around. And I also want them to move through the like animal doors that we have. but it's totally up to you. If you don't mind them not walking through your little doors that you do for the animals, it's absolutely fine. If they are not traversable and you're only going for the realism, I try to definitely go for realism, but also usability, so kind of in the middle. But sometimes, well, some of my habitats are not really usable if you want to play them in franchise mode, for example. So what I'm doing now is I'm gonna place a lot of these ferns all around the habitat. I just love ferns. I use a variety. I use like this silver fern. I think we got this with the Oceania pack, if I'm not wrong. And I like to use the small one. I feel like the big one is just a notch too big for my liking for here. And what I also like to use is, where's the other one? The basket fern. And what I do is I place it and I'm gonna put it upright. I'm gonna use the next one. It's gonna be wonky because we have random rotation on. And I'm gonna place them like back to back, two of the different pieces. I'm gonna group these, and now I have my own little fern that I can use all around, and it just looks a little bit different to the one that we used before, the silver fern. I feel like this area definitely lacks a little bit of something. I'm gonna go over there in a little bit. And now I'm also gonna place that all around the habitat. So now that I feel satisfied with the ferns, you can already tell this is looking so lush. The backdrop is still relatively plain, but I did put in some of these planters, so we will fill in these at the very end, and then the background will look also pretty lush and much better than it does now. But first I'm gonna go back into my favorites and search for different plants that I want to use. And I think I also want to use the big blue stem grass. It just adds like a little bit of something in there. It just looks so much more interesting if you have these little tiny things in there. And also in bigger areas you can definitely use the big one. We can also use the dry one, the dry version of this. I also like to really lower it into the ground and place that around areas like this. It can also look like some sort of grass. You can definitely use these in like drier habitats, for example in desert habitats. And I think I'm gonna also use a little bit of this one. The purple doesn't necessarily fit super well, so I'm not gonna overdo it with this one and rather use a bit more of the dry version. For example, around the corners you can use it like really low into the ground, and in the background you can have it a little bit higher. And now I feel like it's getting pretty full, but we will not stop here. We will use even smaller plants. So what I'm thinking, maybe I'm also going to use the ponytail palm also one of my favorite plants. This one was like before I started using the cabbage tree, but at the time we didn't really have the cabbage tree, and I honestly bought the pack, what was it, the aquatic pack, especially for this plant, because I really liked it when other people used it in their YouTube videos, and I was like, I needed this plant, so I basically bought the whole pack just for this specific plant. And if you place it even lower into the ground, you can also make it look like some sort of grass. And I feel like our little animals, the tapir and the capybara, are absolutely going to love the habitat because it's so lush. Over here we can also use this. Over here. And now I'm gonna go with the smallest ones. And I think for this habitat I am going to use, where is it? The hosta. I'm gonna use the like normal hosta plant, not the variegated. I definitely like the normal hosta plant much more than the variegated version, but sometimes I just mix things up and also use that one. But as you can see, I didn't even put the variegated version into my favorites. And sometimes I put on the align to surface, sometimes not. It really depends on the area. And I'm just going to use like the big one and lower it into the ground, or leave it a bit more on top to make it a bit more simple and not to always change between the small one and the big one. And honestly, the big ones just help you to fill in space much quicker, and also to keep the piece count lower. I know I'm sometimes absolutely going overboard with my piece counts, especially with like bigger buildings. For example, the night house in the Oceania area that I did, or the nocturnal house, only like the facade of this building already has like 5,000 pieces. And I absolutely love the look of it, but I'm absolutely dreading the point where the zoo is getting much fuller than it is now, and then struggling with my FPS. But right now my zoo is still going pretty nicely, and I honestly don't have like the best PC. It's like decent, it's pretty fine for gaming, especially for Planet Zoo, but there's definitely better PCs out there. I'm thinking about getting different parts for my PC to just elevate the look, and also to maybe be able to record with a little bit more of a higher quality, because I sometimes feel like my videos are a little bit muddy when it comes to the graphic or the quality of the video, but I feel like it's still pretty fine. So what I do is I place the hosta all around the corners of the little islands that we have. I'm not really using it in the back of like these piles. I'm not gonna place it on top. It just looks a little bit weird since it's more of like a ground dwelling plant, if you can say that. So I'm gonna use it in the front and to create a little bit something. Also, the inspiration picture that I have has like really weird plants. I don't know what plants exactly it is, but they immediately reminded me of the hosta plant that we have in game. So I knew that I'm gonna use it a lot in here. And sometimes just go back, take a look at the habitat from a different angle and see where you are missing some things. For example, this area is still really open. The pathways are still really open, and I'm gonna change that in a little bit. But now I'm gonna also take one more plant. Are we gonna use this one? no, I feel like this is going to look weird. Where is it? It's the Buddleia, if I'm calling it correctly. And I'm gonna also use this all around. I'm sometimes also using it more in the back. I feel like it sometimes also looks a little bit like the nettle that we used more in the beginning of the video. But I feel like the nettle also is a really beautiful animal. I'm not going like absolutely crazy with this, but I'm just going to place a few here and there to keep it interesting. And I feel like this is already enough. Place a few here and there. And I feel like this is already looking pretty good. I think I'm gonna go back with some more buffalo grass. And I'm gonna place it like this. I'm gonna place them individually. I'm not going to use a group or layer it. I'm just gonna put it into the ground just a little bit and fill in the really open areas. I feel like we also did not use enough of the green buffalo grass. I'm gonna entirely use this one. You can sometimes toggle on the align to surface so that it's aligned more, and now it makes much more sense if you're lowering it into the ground. I'm not going too crazy with this, but just to have these areas not open just can feel like a little disconnected from the areas around. I also feel like this area, it's like a really harsh over here, so I'm gonna like kind of smooth it out by using some of the grass, having it a little bit higher, and then also using some of this and having it like really low in the ground, so just the tips are looking out. And now this corner or this area looks much smoother than before. I'm also gonna do that all around in the back here. And if you want to go really crazy, you can use the small buffalo grass and go into the corners and just fill in the corners, because there the grass would typically grow a bit higher. And now this looks so much better. And I feel like I'm gonna use a little bit of the rock wall from here, and I'm gonna place it over here, and then over here to have like a little bit I'm making sure to leave a little bit open so that the animals can walk in and out. As I said, the stalagmites have a weird traversable area. And like a gap over here, I would go in with the buffalo grass with the small one normally and just fill it in. And over here too, gonna go this. This is like really dainty details. You don't need to do that. I'm doing this because I'm crazy and I absolutely love my buffalo grass. And I think I'm gonna use a little bit more of the hosta over here, but I'm gonna use the small one, maybe the medium one, and place it like this as it's growing a little bit over this part. And what I also like to do, now this water area is like really plain, I like to use the periwinkle leaves, the green ones without the like flowers on top, and I lower this a little bit into the ground, or into the water to be exactly, so that the tips are sticking out of the water and the base of this item is under the water, and I place them in these corners. And I always say it kind of looks a little bit like duckweed, but it also looks like just like plants, a little bit of leaf litter and stuff like that that's floating on the water. And also gonna use the different colored one, also gonna place it in these groups. And I think I'm also gonna use a little bit of leaf litter and place it here too, so it looks like there's a little bit of leaf litter floating on the water. Since the animals go in and out of the water, they will make it dirty, so that's why I also use like a relatively dirty look. And I think I'm gonna use one more over here, like in the middle, so it doesn't look too plain. I'm gonna use the periwinkle. In a little group here. And what I'm trying, I was just thinking about maybe using the dry bush and placing it like really low in here, so that it maybe looks like there's just a bit of debris floating. I feel like this is looking pretty good. Or does this look weird? No, you can't really see it through the glass. And now the area of the water just looks a little bit more interesting. And I also think a little bit of extra, it's not technically foliage work, but I feel like this also fits really well, is using the decals. I'm gonna use the surface decal moss, and I am trying to create the same color as the ground. So I'm just going here more like into the orangey, and I feel like this is already looking pretty nice. I'm gonna use this and just place them over here so it looks a little bit more interesting. It's gonna clip like weirdly into the ground, but you can definitely just keep on stacking them. And I feel like I'm also gonna use a bit more of a darker color, so it definitely looks a bit more muddy over here. And just like that, you have a really lush habitat. Now I'm gonna also fill in the like little planters that we have in the background, and also the planters that we have on top or in the front. And I'm also gonna place plants on the fence. I saw this one picture where this fence was really grown over with like ivy, and I'm probably also gonna use the hosta plant to like really make it look really lush and grown in. I'm gonna do that now, and then we're gonna see what the finished result will look like. So this is the finished tapir and capybara habitat. I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial about how to do realistic foliages and some tips and tricks and techniques on how to execute that. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this real-time tutorial, me talking you step by step through the whole process, and leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Tell me what other types of tutorials you want to see me doing, and I will totally do so. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, where I'm going to show you the whole speed build of the tapir and capybara habitat. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'm going to say my goodbyes. So I hope to see you in the next episode. Until then, bye guys!